Well, it's so great to see Elliott Bay so robust and jumping like this. I got tired of doing large auditoriums and really wanted to come back into the bookstore. And this is such an important bookstore to me here in Seattle. It's legendary, and I knew about it before I even stepped into it. Susan Sontag, was her favorite bookstore here, and of course Susan came here to do her bone marrow transplant, which didn't work out, but as you know, but we would spend a lot of time at Elliott Bay, so it's great to see this great brand new move here into this wonderful place, and to see old friends. So yes, this is can't breathe too much. This is a different group of pictures. It's not so different. I mean, I think of it as note taking. For my portraits, actually, it's like peripheral vision and note taking that I would do if I was doing a portrait. I mean, when you're a photographer, you don't stop seeing pictures. It's the only thing that makes it a photograph is when you pick up the camera and actually take it. But take the picture. And what was great about this work was that I did it just, I was in a kind of like a fragile situation. I had a highly publicized, financial moment, and I just kind of, against all odds, I was told by my publisher they weren't really interested in this book, and I was told by my business people at the time that this wasn't going to this made no sense, haha, no pun intended. So, but I went out, and we have to do that for ourselves sometimes. We just have to take care of ourselves, and for me it was taking care of the work and just, going out and filling myself back up, really, and nourishing. I didn't know. I felt so fragile at the moment, and so I didn't know if I had anything in me left to do this work, and I was really surprised, and it's really exciting to know that it's a deep well, and stuff came out. But I'm going to read you a couple of sections from the book. I did do the text with Sharon Delano, who's my old editor, my old friend. She actually introduced me to Susan Sontag. She was a New Yorker editor at, she helped Dick Avedon edit books. She's been the editor on all my books, and she's helped me find a voice. I mean, the only problem is that she got carried away herself with all this history. And, I sort of laughingly say the funny parts are me, and the really serious, academic parts are Sharon when you read it. It's hard with each of these subjects that I sort of wandered into, not to be seduced by them and want to live in them longer. But I'm going to read you, the first section I'm going to read to you is from this section on Niagara Falls. And it's at the very beginning of the book, and explains the beginning of thinking I might do this project. And then I'd be glad to answer some questions if you're still up for it. It's so great we don't have a slide projector. I'm just going to show you the old-fashioned way. 2 summers ago, I had some business problems that were extremely distracting. I was trying to spend a few weeks with my children at our place on the Hudson in upstate New York, but I kept having to go back to the city for meetings, and I would spend days sitting in rooms with lawyers. This was not something that young children could understand. They were mad at me. We had planned a number of day trips that summer. The first trip I wanted to take, and the longest one, was to Niagara Falls. I thought that the kids would love Niagara Falls. Originally, we were going to take a train, and then I started to think about how my parents would have done something like this when I was growing up. I decided that the best thing to do was to go there by car. It was a 6-hour drive. Let's see. Is there any way to? Is this okay? Yeah. The children would eat dinner at home. I'd put on their pajamas, and we'd get there about midnight. I'd put them to bed in the hotel, and they would wake up whenever they felt like it, and we would open the curtains of the hotel room, and they would see the falls. The view would be a surprise. Well, everything went pretty well at first. Our friends Nick and Alex and their daughter Louie came along, and we pulled into the town on the Canadian side on schedule. But when I went up to the desk at the hotel, the clerk said that they had canceled our reservation. At 11 o'clock, we ran your credit card, and it was rejected, so we gave your rooms away. I said, you did what? So just then, Sarah, my oldest daughter, who was not quite 8, got out of the car with her Pooh Bear and began crying, "Mommy, Mommy." The 4-year-old twins woke up and started crying, and everyone was crying. The clerk said that they had a motel on the other side of town where there were rooms. I got back into the car, headed in that direction, but I stopped at every place we passed, trying to find a room that overlooked the falls. There was nothing. It was an August weekend, and everything was totally booked up. I had to resign myself to going to the motel suggested by the man who had given away our rooms. We took the last 2 rooms they had, and the kids fell asleep right away. I was unbelievably depressed. When it became light the next morning, I got up and went over to the window and pulled open the curtains. We were looking at a cement block wall.
Very lovely.
I felt like such a failure. The view didn't seem to matter much to the kids. We got dressed and went down to the breakfast room where I had a long phone call with some more lawyers, and then went out on the boat and everyone got wet, and while the kids had lunch, I had a conference call with more lawyers. Well, I just wanted to go home. Sarah asked if they could go to a place that Alex and Louie had been looking at. I said sure. I watched them as they skipped to a spot that overlooks the falls, and after a while, I saw that they were mesmerized. I didn't quite get it, so I went to see what they were watching. It was extraordinary. You really felt like you were floating over the falls. I stood behind the children, and I took a picture. So this picture of Niagara Falls, I ended up making the cover of the book, and it really was the beginning of the idea for this project, and that this coupled with some pictures I had taken in Amherst at Emily Dickinson's house. It was actually her brother's house. It really hadn't changed much. They sort of kept it the way it was. It was a revelation walking into it. I had a small digital camera. I was there for my cousin's son's bar mitzvah, and I went to go to look at the house, and I just took pictures in kind of an abandoned way. And I was very impressed with the digital camera, in that you needed very little light, and you could, take pictures without any light. It was the end of the day. It's the very beginning of the book. These pictures here. Sorry. It's a little series here. I'll take this belly band off, which is a pain in the butt. And I started that fall. I just sat down, and when I saw this emotional work starting to come out, I just made a list of places. I made a list of about 12 places and people, and then the book has about 27 altogether. It was just very serendipitous. I mean, it was, the initial list had the Lincoln Memorial, the Spiral Jetty, Graceland. It was like an oddball list, and then I just kept running into more. It was like a domino effect. You would go to Concord, Massachusetts, and I actually went to photograph Walden Pond, and I ended up running into Emerson and I would drive by Louisiana. I eventually went, you walk in and you got mesmerized, and it was, so that's what the book is filled with. I'm going to read you one more segment from the book, and then it would open to questions. And this is my homage to Ansel Adams. I had this idea. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll go to Yosemite and photograph that great valley view because it's still there. I just want to. That would be my homage to Ansel. I'll just go photograph this extraordinary Yosemite Valley. And I'll read from the book. I wanted to make an homage to Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams visited the Yosemite Valley for the first time in 1916. He was 14 years old and had just been given his first camera. And from that moment on, Adams was devoted to Yosemite. The valley had restorative powers for him. He made thousands of photographs of Yosemite. Ansel Adams' pictures are what most people think of when they think of Yosemite. One summer in the 1980s, while I was teaching at the annual Ansel Adams Yosemite Workshop, I walked out to Inspiration Point to take a picture. The clouds had rolled in, and the valley looked magnificent. Well, it seemed amazing to me that you could walk up and take an Ansel Adams picture. Well, of course you couldn't, really. Ansel himself said that people were disappointed when they went to these places and their pictures didn't look like his. His picture represented a moment he had worked on for a long time. He said that the image was not the way the subject appeared in reality, but how it felt to him. I wanted to make a picture that showed that the places Ansel photographed are still there. The view is protected, not least because of what Ansel did to make people aware of how extraordinary the landscape is and how precious. The summer in the 80s, when I was at the workshop, I met Jean Adams, who is married to Ansel's son, Michael. Jean is a very outgoing, joyful, and smart woman. She ran the Ansel Adams Gallery in Yosemite for a while. Jean still has a cabin there, so I called her up and talked to her about the picture I wanted to take. She said to come out, we would look around. I had in mind the view of the valley in one of Ansel's most well-known pictures, Clearing a Winter Storm. He made it in 1935, and I thought it was taken from the spot I'd walked out to in the 80s, but I wasn't exactly sure. And when my assistant Nick Rogers and I drove into the park, we stopped at a place called Tunnel View, which looks like the right spot. There are 2 parking lots at Tunnel View, which means that fewer people fall off the side of the road than they did before. There's always at least one photographer there, and usually about 10. It's a mecca. The first afternoon, someone with an 8x10 camera in a dark room in the back of his car was making tintypes. It's kind of wonderful. I took a couple of pictures, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. What is extraordinary about Clearing Winter Storm is the clouds. Jean Adams' cabin is an A-frame in Yosemite West, not far from the village where the gallery is. We lit a fire, made dinner. I looked at the maps I had, and Jean had a couple of maps. We were trying to figure out where Clearing Winter Storm was made. There was Inspiration Point and an old Inspiration Point, and then there was Artist Point. Well, it was confusing. Tunnel View is on a road that was completed in 1933, so it would have been available to Ansel, although if you study his picture, it seems like he was standing a little more to the right and higher up. Something is off. You can see further down the valley in Ansel's pictures. This is trying to capture that I meander a lot, in case you don't know. This is like, I do this a lot. Okay. There's really no deep content in this. There were still no clouds the next morning. I mentioned this at breakfast, and Jean looked at me and said, Annie, Ansel would wait 2 or 3 weeks for clouds. Well, then she said, those old-time landscape photographers, if you look closely at their pictures, you can see that they took clouds from one place and used them over and over again. Well, I cringed. That's something I do all the time in my digital portrait work. If I don't have the right sky, I'll just add clouds. Well, I was glad to hear about the early landscape photographers borrowing clouds, but I felt very strongly that for this picture it had to be straight. I wasn't going to mess around. It had to be the real thing. So we went to Tunnel View and I shot the sunrise. No clouds. The light wasn't good, but I thought we should look for the other views. Not that I had to be exactly where Ansel was, but it'd be nice to know. And at the parking lot across the road, there was a sign that said Inspiration Point 1.2 miles. course, it doesn't say 1.2 miles up, but so we took some bottles of water and headed off. We weren't moving very fast. We stopped to look at the view several times, and after a while we got to a place where an old road crossed the trail. Trees had fallen across it, and you could still see a little asphalt. The sign pointed further up the trail to Inspiration Point, and that part of the trail was fairly steep. And Jean was wearing what looked like slippers. I actually talked to Jean, I hope she forgives me, but really at that point she told me she had just had open heart surgery. I know it's not funny, but it was funny at that moment because I was suddenly thinking we had still a ways to go, and I did look down and she was wearing what looked like slippers because we weren't really planning on going up that road. So we had to, I was looking for an easy way out. She said she always wanted to walk the old road, which she thought went to Bridal Veil Falls, and since I could see that it went down, that seemed like a good idea. When we got back to Jean's house, someone checked the weather report, which said that nothing was going to change. There were to be no clouds that day. I don't usually pay any attention to weather reports, but it didn't look good, and we decided to leave early and drive over to Carmel, where Jean and Michael live in Ansel's old house. It's where his darkroom is. Ansel built the house in the early 60s on a site just a mile from Edward Weston's house. I'll show you that. You mind if you hold it up and then I can keep talking. I photographed the darkroom and then went back to New York. A few days later, I got an email from Jean saying that she and Michael had gone to the park on the weekend and that the clouds were glorious. Well, for the next 2 or 3 months, I kept trying to find a day that I could pop back into Yosemite. Not that you can ever pop into Yosemite, especially in the middle of winter. If you even try to get in without change, they give you a fine. But I finally did get back in January, and of course, there were no clouds. I made some pictures through the windshield of the car and took some views of the roads. We went up to Tunnel View, and there were no clouds, but I took pictures anyway. About 10 days before I had to turn the book over to the printer, I flew out to Yosemite again. I knew that it was a crazy thing to do, but things looked promising when we arrived at the Fresno airport. We threw our equipment into a van and raced toward the valley. There was a hailstorm and a lot of rain, and for a while the road was socked in by a cloud. It was already late in the day, and I was afraid that we would miss the light. I wouldn't let anyone in the car talk about the weather. It took 3 hours to get to Tunnel View, but when we arrived, the valley was still filled with clouds and mist. I jumped out with my camera, found a place among the 30 to 50 people there who were crowded around taking pictures. There were tourists and several photography students. Mateus, one of my assistants, ran behind me with a tripod, but there was no time to set it up. I got about 8 frames before the light changed and the clouds disappeared. They didn't come back. So there's an exercise in this book. I realize, don't even try to compete with Ansel Adams, but I ended up running these 70 pictures like this, and I don't know if you can see them, but it's the 3 trips, and the last one has the clouds. Again, it's a homage. It's the journey, not the something.